Oh man, today is an exciting day. It is my 100th episode of the Undraped Artist Podcast, and man, do I have a special episode for you guys. In fact, it turned out so good that the people involved, my three guests, have agreed to make it a series. So we're going to keep adding to this episode and bringing more awesome content to you in this category. So you're going to love it. Stay tuned. But first, I made you guys a promise. To celebrate my 100th episode, I am giving away 3 of these sketch cases. And 2 of them are going to my incredible patrons, those of you who, out of the kindness of your heart, you give me a little bit of money and some not so little every month in order to support this podcast. And you don't have to do that because it's free content. But it helps me to do better and better podcasts and keep coming back every week and take time away from my actual paying job of making paintings and teaching painting and drawing. So thank you to you. So I'm giving 2 away to you guys and then 1 away to all of you who commented and gave me 5 stars on Apple Podcast and or Spotify. So first, let me tell you who won. Number 1 of my patrons is Jornay Vazart. All right, I'm going to spell that for you. JORNAYVAZART. You are my first winner among the patrons. Second winner among my patrons is Elsa Wade 1322. And then my last winner among those who gave me 5 stars and followed me on YouTube and so on is Sandy, SANDI _ WILSON _ art, ART. Congratulations to you 3 winners. Contact me at jeffheinmobile@gmail.com and give me your mailing address and I'll send these sketch cases right over to you. Thanks again for 2 years of amazing support from all of you, my listeners, and particularly my patrons and my amazing sponsors, Vasari Paint and Rosemary Brushes. I can't give them enough thanks either for their amazing support and trust in me as the podcast host and creator. So thank you to all of you and enjoy the 100th episode. So I got to tell you guys, first of all, that I didn't just off the top of my head grab you 3. I felt like you 3 are going to make the best conversation. Just because of your unique personalities, you all have I think you all have strong opinions, but yet are open-minded. And that's what I like about you 3. But also you're all, in my opinion, at the top of your game. You guys are at the top of the field with your peers, but you're also, I feel like, at the top of your own personal game in painting. So to me, you guys are a powerhouse group, and that's why I'm so excited about this. And as you probably know, this is the 100th anniversary. So I'm crazy honored to have you guys here for this 100th anniversary special that we're having. Yeah, it's really
cool. Honored to be here, honored to be asked.
Yeah, it's really true.
And the other thing is, I'm biased because I consider you guys all good friends. So it's nice to have you guys on here for that reason too. But all right, so let's get rolling. So like I said, I got a lot of questions, and let's just start with the most basic question. What is art to you guys? And Kwong, since you laugh, let's start with you. What do you think art is?
I was being interviewed when I was in my 20s, and somebody was on the TV and they stuck a microphone in my face, and that was the first question they asked me. And spontaneously, I thought, well, art to me is a byproduct of your search for what is true.
Nice.
And I don't think I've come up with a better answer than that. And I think really, which implies that if you're as an artist, obviously, if you are searching, constantly digging at what is meaningful to you. That's what I mean by true. The stuff that happens along the way um, is art, in the sense that it doesn't matter what it looks like, right? It's not a style that you're chasing. I'm not chasing the market. I'm chasing stuff. I'm chasing what is meaningful to me and what is true to me. And all of it is the whole trail of work. In the end, when you look back, all of that becomes art to me.
Okay, so true. What do you mean by true? That's sort of
Yeah,
an
there you
overused word today. You know,
Yes.
my truth, this whole thing about my truth.
Yeah.
When
It's
you
not.
say truth, when you're searching for truth, what does that mean? And does that, and just think of me as a layperson, and perhaps I am compared to you three, a layperson, but that seems very abstract to me. If I'm searching for something that doesn't represent anything, or maybe is just completely non-objective, am I still searching for truth? I mean, could you expound on that?
Yes.
What that means?
That's the best question you could really ask. I'm still trying to figure that question out. I think there's two truths. There's a personal truth that what you deal with on a personal level, and that's kind of a subjective truth, right? But I think there is a truth that is bigger and stands apart of whatever I want to believe. There's a truth that's much bigger, and it doesn't care what I think or believe. I can draw from it what I want to. But as an artist, I'm working with a very limited set of information. You start out, you only know how to draw, for example, I've broken it down to three different levels of truths, and the first level, I call it's really based on belief and assumptions, and that's how I think humans have walked the earth for thousands of years using that first level. We're given sets of beliefs, and we look through that set of belief at the world. And so as an artist, when you first learn when you're learning to paint and draw, you think, well, if I could just get that likeness of the face to look like a face, then I've arrived. I can render it to look like reality as I perceive through that first level. But the second level is when you start asking questions. You think, well, really the core of painting and drawing comes down to line, shapes, value, color, texture, and edges. That's your set of vocabulary.
You say that so fast. You
Yeah.
you know that so well.
Well, I could put it this way: it's value, and then
Yeah.
color, texture, edges, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of those and lines, and all of those things go to make what? They go to describe shapes. So all of those elements in the end go to describe shapes. And what quality of shape, what kind of shape? Graphic shapes, atmospheric shapes, shapes that has form because light and shadow hits on it. But on the first level, I didn't even understand what light and shadow was. And you got to remember, artists for hundreds of years didn't know what light and shadow was. They thought a face is a face is a face until something else playing on. That visual vocabulary gives you light and shadow. It gives you impressionism. It gives you abstract expressionism. It gives you what the Japanese did, which is local tone, and all those things. So on the second level, I'm in my studio, my lab, mixing this combination with that combination and asking questions. What will happen if I do this, if I did that, you see? And that's really asking, to me, that's where I'm really searching for the truth on that fundamental level as an artist. I don't think there's any truth in pursuing or not pursuing. There's no truth in prescribing what was given to you by your fathers and grandfathers and your religion or whatever it may be, what someone else put on top of you, and then you have to well, that's truth, So I'll expand on that. That might be just a few stepping stones, but for me, the searching for what is true is always on the edge of not knowing what's in front of you. You see what I mean? So I'm digging. I'm trying new, and even now in the studio, as I'm looking, I'm finding new color combinations that I'm really not a good colorist. So I'm constantly trying to figure out how to do it.
Crack me up.
No, it drives me nuts.
You're one of the best colorists out there.
It's not true.
That's funny. Well, that's why you're good, because you don't know you're good.
Oh, thanks. But no, in
Well,
that
how's it
sense,
work for truth, Jeff?
Yeah, I know. This guy's talking about truth, and he just told the most biggest lie I've ever heard in my life.
it's not a lie. It's so true. But so to me, that's one kind of truth, and on a deeper level is like, and Joe and I were talking about this, the ego thing. Ultimately, the ego is all about first level. And the second
Right.
level, you have to lay that aside and you say, is it true or isn't it true? Let me find out, right? And the third level is where the ego is really gone. And when you're painting, there's no attachment to fear or what that thing might look like. And you're in a sense, it's the zone the athletes and writers and artists get into. And it's there all the time, but we don't tap into it because we filter everything through the ego.
Right.
And so that immediately stops that.
Right.
Mhm.
What do you think
That's
about
all.
that, Rose?
Well, I find that it's a really difficult thing to actually determine truth for yourself. I think that these biases that he was talking about, the things that you were given, are so strong that it takes a long time of peeling that away to even begin to even know what those are. Like I find it, I mean, I can do it to an art reference if you want. Something I noticed what I like about teaching is I find that I'm honoring um, ideas and ways of painting and things like that I don't even know I'm honoring. Like I'm being held back by, or decisions or like habits inside of my painting decisions that are really they they've I'm kind of unconscious of it. And you know what I'm saying? So like so like I like to break apart what I think I know about painting. And it's like when you break off this part and you break off this part, all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, I'm still honoring this other thing inside of it that I wasn't even aware of. And that's what I mean about like the difficulty of sort of discovering what truth is. I do think that maybe I just would combine it all with what you said instead of actually. I think that there's a moment inside that you'll have that third level will pop in and you'll be in touch with it for a second. And then your first and second level will come in. If I'm using your references, Kwong, they'll come in and they'll take over. And then you're like, it's like kind of a movement that you're in all of the time. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's not necessarily like I can get to a truth. It's like I experience more moments of connection, and then I go away. I come back to, well, how am I doing? Oh, I'm doing great. Kind of conversations that are in your head and stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Inescapable.
But back up a little bit, though. You
Inescapable.
comment on his perception, which is truth. He defined it as searching for truth. But what is art to you, though? And
Yes.
how do you respond to that question?
So yeah. So when I'm responding, I'm going to launch off of Kwong's first. When he said his thing about your first one about the discovery, can you say it again, Kwong? I'll tell you. Well, I can tell you what mine is. I always think of painting as an artifact of my experience, right? That was like, that's like a really, really good one to kind of go in. But do I think that's art? I think that I'm a human being living on the planet trying to figure out how to kind of show it. Does that make sense? To try. And there's always motivations that I'm aware of and not aware of, which is not what you're asking about the art, but it's more closer to the question of truth. I really wonder. I feel like art probably lives in this great, giant, deep need to actually create. And I see it in all kinds of ways, all kinds of human beings in all kinds of different ways. And it's about this, to me, something I feel like I get a little closer. It's about maybe about this movement toward being so engaged that you honor that thing. So like, like you can watch a chef who actually just takes the food and instead of just doing the easy thing or even the things that they've been trained, they just keep trying to discover something else about it, which is kind of what you were saying, Kwong. And I think that something about that part, maybe this is like the idea of process, something about that part, maybe art comes in this kind of this continuously breaking, going in further and further and further, but it's not really a known thing.
Of course
Does that
not.
make sense?
Of course not.
Yeah.
No, it's not one thing
It's
at
like,
all.
all of this, even truth is not really a known thing to me, you know? It's like kind of, I feel like I'm always just kind of like on the edge of discovery. And maybe it's a posture of discovery is something about being an artist. Maybe that's what art happens in this process of discovering what it is to be a human being on the planet and finding some way to convey your experience of it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
What about you,
absolutely.
Joe? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, they said everything. I have nothing to say at this point.
Come on, that can't be
Oh, no,
true.
you don't.
That can't be true.
I think it's, for me, where genuine curiosity meets a really pure intention to say something. I think when the desire to express overpowers the desire to be heard, I think that's where art happens.
Oh,
That's interesting.
That's great.
So wait,
Yeah.
but what's the point of expression if there's no one to listen?
Oh, this is the one hand clapping question.
I think
Really,
You
it's a really
closet
profound
Buddhist,
statement.
you.
It's a really profound statement, but what else would motivate one to express themselves through any
Well,
medium if there's no one to receive it?
Well, look, we all know we're in the art world. There's external and internal motivation that drives what we do.
Right.
Yeah.
And external motivation, fame and money, and now the awful, god awful thing that's going on with social media. Now all the artists are they're performance. It's a
Yeah.
performative
that's
thing.
another thing we could talk about. Yeah.
Right. And to me, it's so disturbing that this the tail is wagging the dog. I think
Right.
that this we've lost the ability to be quiet and to receive.
Right. That's
Right. And I think reception is everything. The depth of sensitivity, right? It increases the possibility of reception. And it's in those quiet spaces that I think we really have a genuine opportunity to find something that's truly our own. And I just think that's becoming less and less these days, I would say.
This is probably a stupid analogy, and I know a lot of people hate sports analogies, but Joe, you I'm sure appreciate them. But I can imagine when I was young, I practicing hockey by myself or basketball by myself. Those are my two favorite sports. And I would learn some really interesting move or something, and no one was there to see it. And yet I was so excited that I had done that. I had achieved that thing. It didn't matter to me that no one was there to see it, right?
Yeah.
Because I had done something difficult. Is that what you're talking about when you say express?
No, I think a lot of people just need to be heard, and they'll do anything to be heard. And then there are writers and artists and musicians who create because they have the desire simply to say something, and that's their own. And I think if you, it takes a lot of courage to do that. There's different types of art, right? I mean, so obviously the answer is purely subjective for everyone. So I was glad when you said it. What's your definition? Because for me, clarity and economy are important, right? I'm not a huge fan of, as much as I respect what the abstract expressionists did, very much of the painting is akin to automatic writing, where de Kooning would say, I'd paint until the painting painted itself and I thought it was finished. And that's a very different way than the way I express myself. Like for me, like Corot is one of my favorites, and he talked about harmony, and Kwong was mentioning that earlier with the color. The nature provides these exquisite color harmonies, and they're different every single day. And I'm fascinated by the necessity, if to get out of the way of my own ego, to think I'm going to make something, when in fact it's a collaboration, and that if I'm really genuine, like I said, in my connection and the intensity of that connection, I'm constantly being informed. And then so the art isn't me. The art is me being in an infinity loop or connection loop with the subject that I'm painting. And
Okay, can I ask you a question, Joe? So just to make sure I understand this. So it's because of the way you reacted to my analogy, you're saying it's not about achievement at all. It's literally about saying something, communicating a message of some sort.
For me, yes.
Okay.
And the more, and it was Innes talked about the importance of the singularity of the message, right? Or the singularity of the emotion. He said for it to be a successful work of art, it must resonate a single emotion in his mind. And
But
so I think we all.
Would
Yeah.
you paint if you were the last man on earth?
Yeah.
That's a very
what
good
would be
question.
the point?
I couldn't answer that, to be fair. And I don't pretend. There's a lot of pretension in our world. You know, I remember watching the movie Saving Private Ryan, and there's a scene in the movie where this guy panics on the stairwell and he freezes, and the soldiers go up and they end up killing his buddies, and people in the movie theater were yelling and screaming, "What a coward! What of this? What of that? Blah blah blah." None of us know what we would do,
Right.
until we are in that instance. And so would I paint if I was the last person on earth? I don't know, because what I do is meant to be shared.
Okay,
Yeah.
but
I'm
there's the
sharing-
there's the contradiction though. So it's not about putting on a show and him being heard, but it's about saying something and expressing something without the desire to be heard. So then
I think
that would
that-
suggest that you wouldn't need an audience at all.
No, I think you're confusing this. Well, what I'm saying is, there's different motivations behind the creative act for me, right?
Right.
So if you are doing things to be heard, you are going to do things that are outside of doing things just to say something.
Okay, so when you say heard, you mean not
Noticed.
just heard, but noticed and respected and cheered.
Right. And I just think that's why most people go down the trodden path.
Okay.
Right. I mean, they if you're going to paint a still life, make sure the knife is angling diagonally off the edge of the front of the table. And,
Okay.
people are, painting Dutch still life still, and it's
Yeah.
not that they're not well painted, but Jesus Christ, we live in the 21st century. The thing I don't understand is why more people don't paint the world we live in. They
Yeah.
paint a fantasy of what was, or they paint what's been pre-approved by others, knowing full well that it will have acceptance and they'll sell paintings. Now, look, that sounds like a nasty judgment. It's not. It's an observation.
Yeah.
And what
Okay.
I said to Kwong before we got on is, and the question I would put to my new friends here, even though I've known their work forever, who's still looking? And who stopped looking a long time ago?
Yeah.
And to me, that's where it gets really interesting. When I look at the work of the contemporary artists that are out there, I mean, every once in a while I see something, I go, wow, that person is, they're not resting on what they know. They're pushing, they're trying things, they're challenging themselves. George Innes, the thing I love about Innes was always 20 years ahead of the prevailing taste with his work. And by the time he died, his work was acutely abstract, long before abstraction occurred.
Yeah, I love
And he was, if you look at his paintings, there's always a sign, there's a little battleground somewhere on the canvas where he's searching to say something.
Yeah.
That interests the hell out of me. That's so exciting. It's not like it's all been phoned in, like he knows how to paint that rose exactly the same way every time, and it's going to be perfect every time. And he's pushing and he's trying different things. He's painting different light effects. He's outside of that comfort zone, And so, like I said, for me, the art for me is when somebody is curious and they have this genuine desire to say something really specific and personal to them. And if
Search
it's
always comes through, that search always comes through. We can see it in the painting, can't you?
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
But I find that it's okay that sometimes that search for a while looks like imitation. I mean, I feel like
Well, you can't avoid it.
Yeah, you
you
can't avoid
can't-
it, right?
Yeah, you can't avoid that. You're absolutely right.
And
There's
you
nothing
know,
wrong with it. It's part of it. We all study art history, right?
Yeah.
You're moved by impressionism or tonalism or naturalism or whatever it is that strikes you, or abstraction. you know, and we have all of our work, I'm sure, has tenets folded into it from all of those things, or informed
I
at
mean,
least by those things.
yeah, because I think that hits on what I think essentially what we all are kind of agreeing on, that there's something about this discovery, this ache to discover my relationship to the being on the planet, being a human being on the planet. And for me, I have like a really strong picture in like 2001 of my absolute, maybe it was incapable of not trying to put something out in the world. Like it is like so part of my being. It was like the one thing I know about myself is that somehow I have to figure out how to translate this personal experience, or this experience that I am on the planet. I have to put it out into some form in the world. And I don't know that it's always, I don't know that form has a lot of purity into it, but that I think is where I think we can all agree that human beings ache to create forms, right? Because I think we ourselves are a form that's been created, right? We're like this vessel for like 80 years that came out of nothing, and we exist on the planet for just this little bit of time. And it just reveals to me that we are a form, and it's like the universe witnessing itself. Does that make sense? Like in these eyes of this person, this Rose Franson, for this 80 odd years. And I think that impulse, that the fact that we even exist, is we mirror that same thing when we desire to create. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what you just said about aching brings it perfectly back to what Jeff asked me earlier, what is truth? So, and this to kind of touch on what Joe was saying about what some artists are searching for recognition, they'll do all these stunts. But the truth is, we are all where we're supposed to be, until you have that ache to find something a little deeper. You know what I mean? So you can have this wonderful stunt that makes you $1 million, but at some point you're going to feel this pang, like, am I doing all that I could do? You know what I mean? And if you don't listen to that call for truth, then you keep doing what you're doing. But as soon as you listen to that call, that's what I mean by the search for truth. You follow it. You don't know where it's gonna go. That's the point. And it's like, no, I don't know what the truth looks like, but I know it ain't that. It wasn't that. You know what I mean? So
you're compelled to honor it. Like
that's right.
It's a requirement for as much as it is to feed yourself.
Right.
I mean, and that's why, Joe, I kind of think that I might even paint if I'm the last person on the planet. I don't know if it would be painting, but I know for sure I would be making something. Does that make sense?
I get that. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know what it would be, but I would, just trying to find, I just think it's like, I totally agree. It's like trying to find, we're all using the same ideas, right? Discovery, searching, aching, just to try to find some way to have this force that goes through us, just as because we're born and we exist, to actually find a way to replicate that in the world.
Yeah. I would argue that creativity is what makes us human. Because I mean, if you think of, there are lots of animals that will remember you for 20, 30 years if they're separated, from you. And so it's not memory. To me, when I feel most alive when I'm being creative. And so I'm with you 100%. If I were the last person on earth, I would be doing something. I'd find something to make. It probably wouldn't be painting because I'd have no house to hang it in, or, probably, but I'd have to create, I would think. But I got to follow up with Joe on one thing though. So in the Dutch thing, it's kind of funny you mentioned that, because I just reached out to an artist who does Dutch painting, and I want to buy one of his paintings. So I actually really appreciate that kind of painting. So I want to dig a little deeper.
I appreciate it as well. I'm not denigrating the act of the painting or the creative,
no, I know
the craft of the painting. I'm just talking about prior aesthetics, resurrecting prior aesthetics.
Well, that's all I'm talking about. That is my question, though. That leads to my question, which is striving for something that was achieved in the past in your own personal creative journey not searching for truth? I mean, what is it about moving so-called forward, quote unquote, in your creative journey and doing something that hasn't been done before that makes it more true than reaching backward?
Oh,
art
I
history?
think that I mean, I'll touch on what Rose said earlier, and we all go through that. We study with people, and we I love art history, and I've been certainly influenced by many things. I'm just saying, I think there are easier avenues to follow, and again, I would use the phrase prescribed path, right? I mean, if you know that this has already been pre-approved, and people are used to seeing it, then you're going to have a better chance, of course, of getting it noticed and selling it more than likely. So so I just think it's a choice that we all make. I think it can be very beautiful. I love Dutch painting. I mean, had my nose up on many of them at the Metropolitan Museum of Art over the years.
Right.
But like I said, there's something about the fact that we live in this time, and how is it, like, for me, it's important that an artist reflect their time, however they choose to do that. We're living in the 21st century. We're not living in the 19th century. And I've just seen a lot of paintings recently by younger painters who are, painting people dressed in 19th century clothing, leaning on a rake in the woods kind of stuff. And I'm just like, good heavens, man.
You're picking out very specific paintings.
My point being this, look, I remember when my son was little, and I wished I had done a painting of it. And the sunlight was slanting across the breakfast table and hitting his little plastic cup and shining through the cup and reflecting back up into his face. And I just thought, that's as beautiful as anything I've ever seen in art history. And so so it's just for me, it's like I said, it's just there's just something about I mean, I can appreciate the craft, certainly behind these things, but there's just something about, Hopper painted his time.
Yeah.
He painted his world, and imagine being in New York when he was in New York with the thousands of artists all around you, and he had a quote that he kept in his wallet from Goethe, and it said something like, connecting the world around me with the world in me. I'm paraphrasing. And I think that's what he did. He did a distillation of his experience as a somewhat disconnected human being in New York and Cape Cod, and I think the paintings reflect that in a really profound and a beautiful way.
Is it just me, or the rest of you guys also get weirdly excited when you order new paint? Because I don't know about you, but when I get paint in the mail, it feels like Santa just dropped my Christmas presents off at my doorstep. With Vasari paint, my paint of choice and the podcast sponsor, it's even more exciting. And let me show you why. Because when Vasari shows up, it comes in this incredible box where each tube lays in this little compartment perfectly formed around the tube in this nice soft foam. And it's surrounded by velvet, red velvet. Now you got to ask yourself, if a paint comes so carefully protected and surrounded by red velvet, you got to wonder if this paint is worthy of royalty. It is. Vasari is. So if you haven't tried Vasari, you're seriously missing out. And the thing about Vasari, it's not only the best paint out there, it's also made by an incredible company that's been around for 30 years and knows its customer by name. Do yourself a favor, go to VasariColors.com and order yourself some for your next painting.
And that's what interests me.
Yeah.
It's not how he painted the painting. The subjective choice making is fabulous, but those were his choices,
Rose, what do you think about this painting your time idea?
Well, I definitely think that that's one of my main motivations, and it makes me not a very fun teacher because there's so many easy, beautiful things to paint that we've seen before, and I'm always struggling when people, like, we were just in Scotland and they get me a beautiful model and you want to set it up, and it looks like things that we've seen before in the Rose Garden, the walled gardens, and I get why all those pre-Raphaelites painted those paintings like that. Being in Scotland, it makes it, or in England or the UK, it really makes sense. And I'm like, well, how do I see it? And why would I paint this? And it becomes really problematic when you're kind of being organized, by maybe the conditions to actually try to find something, to paint something like that. And then you go, but man, it just, I agree with you. There's when I feel like that's not my truth. Like, why would I have a beautiful woman being in roses? But at the same time, I think that it's sometimes maybe part of the discovery, part of the understanding of how I know myself as a painter and how do I know my truth is in this imitation, right? Is in seeing that if I try painting something like a Dutch still life or a woman smelling a rose or something, that when I'm in the middle of it, it's almost as if some part of me in the discovery is I almost have to experience it in order to say, oh, that isn't me. Does that make sense? It's like I discover myself by the opposites, but by going, by going, yeah. So I paint this. I'm inspired by this scene in the Scottish lands, and then I come back and I go, well, is that me? Is that is that the world I see? Is that the world I live in? I mean, it's certainly not the world I live in Iowa, right? So I come back and I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with these paintings that I did, even though I was completely energized and enjoying the experience of looking at such profound beauty, and yet and trying to paint it. In fact, I thought maybe I would mention this, is that it's like, maybe this is closer to what you say, Kwong. It's like that the first time I paint something and maybe you too, Joe, you too, Jeff, all three of you guys, first time I paint something, I just try to figure out how to get it, right? Like, how do I paint it? How do I get it? And it's like a really big motivator. You have the rain, the changing weathers and stuff. And then it's like, I want to go back and do that one. And then now do it again and go, how would I paint it? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If there's like two, I wish I had two lifetimes, because I feel like I can't quite in that moment where I'm trying to get it, become the artist that you're describing, Kwong, in the second and third level always, because I'm in this striving to sort of even understand what I'm seeing and trying to interpret it and paint. And then at the same time, I'm like, if I take it back and I sit it in the studio, how would I actually paint it? If I had that space of time, some quiet look, seems like a lot of the painting when you're out on location and such has a real tempo of reaction. And maybe there's truth in that. And I'm sure there's truth in that, right? I'm sure there's truth in that reaction. I know that if you have 7 or 8 other people painting you, you're all reacting to something different. And there might be one little doorway to truth and to your truth. That why is that part why are you concentrating on this? And why is that the interest for you in this moment when you're looking? But a lot of that painting, that when you're on location or you're painting a model from life and stuff, seems like it's a lot of world of reacting for me. And just like there's an immediacy of the interpretation. And I do wonder, and I don't know, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on this. I do wonder about this, like, space that I need to create or allow for in my studio, for where I go, okay, how would I paint if I'm not only in reaction? Not only painting immediately, I mean, maybe you guys disagree with that. Maybe that's exactly.
No, it's beautiful. You just said it perfectly. I as you were talking about it, I was thinking about me learning the guitar. So I've been playing the guitar for almost as long as I've painted, but I never thought about music the way that I do about painting. So when I was trying to learn, and I'm trying to learn Stairway to Heaven, right? So this song, first time I got it to sound like Stairway to Heaven, it's like, oh my God, it sounds like Stairway to Heaven, right? So in a way, when we're learning to paint, it's just that it just like, oh my God, I got it to look like that still life, and it looks pretty good. And you just excited as heck about that. And then now, each time I play Stairway to Heaven, I try to do it a completely different way. I'll like rearrange it and change rhythm and do it as a classical piece, whatever, right? And so for me, paintings like that, I've been going back to paintings I've done 30 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago. And it was a good composition, but I painted it like that. I'm like, wow, I could do that better now. I think I could do it better now. How would I do that now? So I've taken some of these same that composition that works. And that's like, think of it as you know, if you're a real classical musician, somebody hands you Beethoven's, you know, piano concerto, and you have to reinterpret it. So he's worked out all the problems. You just learn how to. All you have to do is perform it. So in a sense, for me doing these paintings again, I'm not trying to say anything important other than to see if I could do it better or differently, you know. And that takes all my focus, all my joy, everything I've got to do that, you know.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like, there's that. It's like I think this still connects to everything you guys have been saying. It's almost like that happens in this sort of stillness or in this space that I need to create, right? Even to find out what to and back to the discovery. I mean, so what is art? It must be some form of discovery. That must be like you're saying, Joe, giant curiosity to actually try to figure out to try to discover what this says to me, what this life says to me, you know, and giving it back. And I mean, I think it's, I didn't mean to, does it make sense? Like, I don't want to go too far in another.
I want to follow up with a question here.
Yeah.
Kwong brought something to my mind with that analogy of playing Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah.
One thing that's interesting about that analogy is that you had to learn the song before you could change the song.
That's right.
Which brings this thought to my mind. With painting, is it important in that definition of art to know the song or the craft of painting before you say something or search for truth? You know, because if you take that analogy completely apart, you could never have put yourself into Stairway to Heaven if you hadn't just learned how to play it first. And can you do that with art, though? Can you just buy paints one weekend and become an artist and make art without learning the craft first?
Yeah, you can, but that you can only go so far. You could keep coasting like this, but you never develop higher into a higher. Well, no, not never, but the answer is you can to a certain level, to a certain extent. I think Joseph Campbell, who I really love reading, who wrote The Power of Myth, had one of the best quotes about art to me. He said, art is a combination of two things. One is the ability to perform, and the other is the inspiration, the concept, and everything else that brings you to do the art, whatever moves you. But one without the other is not art. So if you develop all the skill in the world, but you don't have the depth in you to search and to question and to find out and to be still and all of that. And so that means that you can learn a technique, how to paint a flower so it looks like a Dutch flower, you know, with the little sweat bead on it and the little fly sticking on it.
And we're really picking on those Dutch painters today.
Today is Dutch painting. But you don't know how to use that skill that you developed to find your own voice, in a sense, right? It's like
but you just said you can, one without the other is not art, which is a contradiction, because you said in the beginning you said yes you can, but then you said one without the other is not art.
I think that might go to what Joe was saying, something about intentionality. I think that when you might accidentally touch on something that might convey some sort of, in that moment, your truth, like the truth that you're in the middle of experience. But I think we sort of think that art lives where you begin to have more intentionality and where you can actually, it feels like a choice rather than an accident. So I think, it's sort of like you're going to flip a coin and eventually you might make a piece of art, you know?
Yeah.
Is that fair? Yeah. Is that a fair assessment of what you're saying?
I think, I'm trying to find a way, because I think you have to attach the word joy to it. Okay. So if I hand grandma a whole set of paint and she's never painted before, and I said, just have fun, throw it on there. And she starts dabbling and the paint happens. And there's a certain amount of joy to it. There's a little spark of creativity, right? And then she'll quickly realize, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Like this is going to get me. So, but in that one moment, though, in a sense, that's a little bit of art, not maybe the highest art you can think of, right? But
some conveyance of your experience.
So I was sitting in a bathroom once, which is where I spend most of my time, and it was a friend's bathroom, and I was staring at the wall, and they were doing some construction. and someone had started stripping the paint and sanding it away and trying to get the wall smooth.
Mhm.
And you could have taken that piece of plaster and framed it,
Oh yes.
but it was completely unintentional. And
Yeah.
if someone had framed that and put it in a gallery and said that it was intentional, I would have believed that it was.
Yes.
So I'm not convinced, and I want you guys to comment on this. I'm not convinced that beauty alone or truth alone or any of these more ethereal kind of concepts are art by themselves. I mean, I feel like intention and craft has to be two elements to make it art.
But I think
Am
that-
I wrong?
Yeah, I think that you in the scenario you just outlined, though, the intention comes in your seeing it. Does that make sense? And you're
So-
framing it.
So
Your
the
thing
viewer
at the-
defines the art, even if
Oh,
it's not made by
That
a
was
human?
good, bro.
No, I think we have a whole series of 20th century art that was, can you see the art in this? And if I see the art in this, then it becomes art. I mean, that was like, that's kind of what you guys know. Joe, you know who I'm talking about, did. You know who I'm talking
No,
about,
we
Joe?
don't know who you're talking about. Do you know who
The
you're talking
toilet guy. The toilet guy. His name's
about? Jeff Koons? Oh, no.
Oh no, she's
That's
talking
another-
about
the urinal.
Duchamp.
The urinal.
Duchamp,
Duchamp.
yeah.
Urinal, right?
R. Mutt, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
our mutts. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
but
when-
Duchamp.
that's what we're told. But are you agreeing with that? Is that your opinion?
I'm saying that if we're looking for intentionality in that regard, then intentionality is you seeing it and you saying this has value. I mean, there's where that next level, that's a level of intentionality. We have to, I mean, the person who made the strip the wall and stuff like that might not have had that intentionality, but you bring the intentionality to it.
Right,
And
you
I
said
don't know
beauty.
that's not also part of it.
Joe, you were smiling. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm
I just feel
curious.
like you were really thinking about this.
Well, I've just been listening. I'm just enjoying listening to you guys, honestly. The thing is that there's ideative work or conceptual work, and then there's work that's different. And that work is born of an intense, visceral connection to something that's body, mind, soul stuff. And that when you have that, that's very different. I mean, when I first experienced this, I mentioned it to you, Jeff, I think, when I was 21, and I was at the print and drawing room at the Met with a group of my buddies from the School of Visual Arts. You know, we're looking at Degas drawings and Ong, and then the guy knew exactly what he was doing. He brought out the study for the Libyan Sibyl. The actual was in a small frame. It was right in front of me, a foot away from me. I know it because I was allowed to photograph it at the time. I photographed it all. I felt something coming off of that. I felt it before I saw it.
Yeah.
That never comes from a conceptual work of art for me, ever, because it was never given it in its making.
Right.
When something is ideative, that's completely different. That when something is born from this intense connection to something, they're different things. And I think they're fundamentally different things.
I think that's
That's
great.
really
I think that's a really great picture of it. I mean, I agree. Okay. It does feel different when Jeff looks at that thing and puts his intention, and he sees this as so beautiful that it becomes art. Than what you just said, Joe. I mean, when I have had pieces, I've had the same experience where something just jumped off and spoke to me, and I felt when I experienced it that the artist who had made it, had left something for me to feel.
It can only give
not the
off
thing.
that. Yes, it only can give off that which it was given.
Yeah.
And if it's
that's
only
right.
given intellect or concept, it can't ever give back more than that. People
That's
can
right.
extrapolate all they want.
That's
But
right.
when I stood in front of the Unfinished Slaves by Michelangelo, I had tears in my eyes. I could feel something coming off of the stone.
Yeah.
I could feel
Right.
it. And all I'm telling you is that's not intellectual.
Right.
That's something else. That's that magic. That's that magic place of a heart connection to something.
yeah.
And I think Michelangelo was simply, at the end of his life, he was a man who had nothing left to prove, showing the world what he loved. I think that's what those marbles are.
I love how woo you're getting right now. I think it's wonderful.
That's
It's so
one of the
I can't help
reasons I
it, man. I'm
invited this
sorry.
guy. You guys all have good stuff to say.
but it's
So
so good.
I want to dig deeper though. So to all of you, what is the role of craft in art? Is it, I mean, I want to say yes, just give me a yes, no answer. Maybe you can expound on it also, but a clear yes, no answer. Is craft necessary
Yeah,
in the
of course.
definition of art? Is it?
It's the language. It's
that,
the language.
it's
How
that
can you
ability to
speak
perform.
eloquently if you don't have a command of the language?
What do you
Right.
think, Rose?
I think he's outlining the degree of a degree, right? So he's saying that I agree with you, Joe, but there's also this thing, like I think that what Kwong described as the joy that somebody might leave in a piece is still there, even if it's not skill. So there could be a felt experience left, even without the skill. Yet at the same time, if that person understood their joy in a way and could communicate it even more, would we have more of a sense of that joy?
Yeah, I think you would. You would have a more
Yeah.
finely pointed, a more finely directed beam
That's
of
right.
whatever that thing is. That's
Right.
all.
So that's what I mean by degrees. It's like you have degrees of art, degrees of levels of that. And I think craft avails a lot more choice, a lot more relationship, a lot more possibility for you to paint what you feel.
So, so you would say that great art has more sophisticated craft.
I don't know if I need to actually say it like that. I would say that I don't know if I'd say it like that. I think
Well,
that
I think
go ahead, Paul.
no, I think you all are touching on it beautifully, but I think that quest for mastery is the craft, obviously, is just as big of a joy to me as what I do, whatever I'm painting.
It's nicely said. Yeah.
Yeah, because it hurts so bad to suck when you try to work on
That's the truth.
Amen to that.
And so that brings you to like try harder, and then all of a sudden you break through, and that one paint looks like and that's just as good as anything.
And maybe that's why like I'm willing to go out and keep reacting to a subject and try to capture it, because that it's just I say to a lot of times you hear about critics and art critics who say, oh, that's just imitation and blah blah blah, and I always tell myself and others that they must not be painting because when you paint and when you try to paint something, that experience is just so powerful. It is, and even if it seems like it looks like imitation in the result, the process itself does not feel at all like imitation. Does that make sense of the subject you're painting? The process is exactly what you're saying. The joy of the discovery of the craft.
Yeah.
So Rose, let me give you my definition of art, and and I wonder if you could comment on it and maybe expound on why you can't make that statement, because I wouldn't make that statement either, to be honest with you. But I'm trying to get your opinions. My definition of art is well, I should say great art has great craft, great design, and a great concept. You might say the 3 C's. Craft. Does design have a C? No, CDC. Okay, so great craft, great design, and great concept.
Center for Design Control.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Or you could say composition.
That was a really bad coincidence.
Composition. There you go. That's
Dang it.
good.
Now I got to come up with a new acronym. Anyway, it's the CDC. So craft, design, and concept. So and you talk about this spectrum. I would personally argue that you might have a really strong design and concept and weaker craft, and it's still a certain level of art. And another painting might have really high craft, a little bit weaker design and concept. There could be, the ratio could be all mixed up, and right. And so it's hard to compare directly 2 pieces of art and say one is greater than the other. Right.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I'm going to have to, I kind of agree with that. I mean, I think it's really hard to compare one. I think that what Joe said about feeling, like being really moved and touched by something, I think that's like the most, if I think about myself as a viewer, it's the most painful thing I experience is my inability to be touched. Right. And I mean, I hope you feel like I'm responding to what you just laid out, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't get touched by art a lot because I wind up studying the craft of it. You know what I
Interesting.
mean? I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by the way it was created. I'm fascinated by the composition or the design. So I become fascinated by elements, and I see that my intention as a viewer is sometimes not to actually be a feeling being, it's to be
Wow.
an does that make sense?
It does.
And so
That's
I
interesting.
think that, in fact, I would like to even know, like, how many times you guys actually really experience going into a museum and being really touched, And I
I
feel
don't
like,
know that I'm that way. I don't feel that way. I get really touched, and then I start to dig into why and start to try and figure out what is happening, what it is they're doing. And
I guess,
I'll actually really go in and be like, okay, what is it? What is it about this formula that this artist has that's working? Is it the craft that's moving me? Is it the design? Is it the concept? Is it all three, and at what degree?
yeah.
But I'm always
That-
start by being touched. Something draws me in, like, oh,
Well,
that
that's
painting moves
different.
me,
I
and
mean,
why?
but that's different. I think that's different from what Joe described. Okay. That being drawn in, yeah, we all have that. Like, you look at this piece in the museum and not that piece in the museum because something about it connects to something you're asking yourself, you know? But what I'm talking about is walking in, and I've seen it, I've actually experienced, maybe it's this way, is a way to think of it, is that I've gone in and being very open, like being very in a receptive mode in a museum, and being, just like Joe described, overwhelmingly touched, right, by a piece of art. And then I can go back in a year later or 2 years later and I feel nothing with that piece. Does that make sense?
Well, it's because of where you are in your life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And I guess that's what I mean. The
Mm.
thing that you choose to look at in the museum is maybe sort of fitting to some of the things that you're actually looking at in your work, or something that you're interested in discovering. But to have that felt experience, that is just, there's a certain posture I think that I have to be in order to do that. And I wonder often if I'm in that enough when I'm making art, which is probably not true. I'm not in that enough when I'm making it myself. Like like you described, Joe, where where the person left that trace inside the work, I've actually tried to study that in myself, about what's required in the experience of the process of painting to allow myself to feel, to convey something that I'm feeling, rather than just trying to understand how to paint it, or rather than just, I mean, because I think all of us want people to feel something when they look at our work. And more than just like, oh, that's really good design, or oh, that's really good craft, or oh, that's really good, I think that I paint things because I hope that it's felt, but I often don't know that I'm actually in the mode of feeling when I'm painting it,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Well, what do
Yeah.
you
But
think
maybe
about this?
you should know.
am I
Kwong,
taking
I
that in
want
the
you to
wrong
comment on
direction?
it.
Yeah.
What do you think about this? So my wife and I were out having dessert last night at this restaurant, and my wife is very, she's not aesthetically motivated. It's just not a priority for her. It's hard to move her by beauty. She's more interested in other things, comfort, for example, right? It's just a difference between her and I. And we're talking about this, and she's like, why do you always have to go to nice restaurants? And I'm like, because they're so beautiful. And I don't even care about the food that much. I just like the environment. I love the music. I love the beautiful decorations. I love the art on the walls. I love the lighting. Like, it just makes me feel good. And and I feel that she feels that way in nature to some degree, and so do I. And so I guess my question is, do we have to be illustrating some sort of truth? And maybe I'm taking some of your statements too literally, and I want you to point that out if I am, but do we have to be illustrating some sort of truth or some sort of emotion that we're feeling, or is design and beauty enough to move people just in and of itself without any
I think
message?
there's legions of salon painters who we'll never hear about, who were fine crafts people, but there's nothing more in the paintings. And I think if you look at Bastien Lepage, he painted the people that he knew in this little village. And what that spawned, which to me is very bizarre, is all these legions of other artists painting goose girls and this and that. They missed the whole point entirely. He was just connecting, I think, genuinely to people that he knew and cared about, or that he was connected to. And same thing, Daniel Ridgway Knight. You probably guys have seen the very famous painting called Hailing the Ferry. And it's a woman with her arm up in the air and the ferry, and he won a Salon medal with it. He spent the rest of his life repainting that painting over and over and over again. And with every time he repainted it, it was exponentially less and had less of a genuine connection to it with every iteration on it. You know, other artists did the same thing. But so I don't think, I think what Rose is talking about, I understand. Because when we're young, we're open and we're free. When we begin to learn, we become constrained by learning how to do this thing. And that makes it very hard just to emote, because you don't understand how to draw well enough to freely connect a form, or to connect a form with feeling, because you're struggling just to get the damn form to begin with. And I think it's this other stage that Kwong was talking about, to go back to what he mentioned earlier, which I thought was great. You know, when you get to that point in your life, and I'm certainly not there, but I feel shades of it at times, where I'm so connected to the subject. And every year I work on balancing my skill sets. I've shared that pyramid idea with you, Jeff, about, you know, kind of analyzing where your skill sets are, and then bringing them into alignment, so that when you make a mark, and I mention you, Kwong, frequently with this, I said, you know, I think when an artist that's been painting for a long time, when they've achieved a certain level of mastery, it's that their skill sets are all in alignment with each other. And that allows access to these other esoteric things that are so much more important, like feeling a mark. But you feel a mark when you're a child because you don't know any different. You lose that for a while you're learning how to do this amazing thing. And for better and for worse, we have the yoke of art history on our shoulders. And there's so many people that have done it so great in such quantity. And then there's that imposter syndrome, right? Like, who the hell am I?
Right.
You know, to go outside in front of nature. All I know is that nature is as beautiful today as it ever was. So for me to go outside and celebrate and try to connect to that, to me, that's as good as it gets. And then however that works out, and I have made, at my best, when I've been self-conscious, I've only made paintings. But when I've been able to be unself-conscious and freely connect and trust, I have a better chance of making art, I think.
That's it.
So what do you guys think? Is beauty enough?
I like to think of beauty as a door.
What do you mean?
That's nice. I like
That's so
that.
good.
Bravo.
So
That's
good.
I like that.
Okay,
we can end
the
right
dumb
there.
ones in the room, can you expound on that a little bit?
Well, I
So
think Joe could expound.
No,
What do you,
I
what
want
do
to
you-
hear it from you. I want to hear.
No,
what do
she's
you
right.
think?
Beauty's the gateway drug. That's
Yeah.
what that is.
Yeah.
That gets us in the door.
Yeah.
And if you can be inspired no matter where you look, or as Kwong and I were talking about before we came on air, like what's always fascinated me is uncommon beauty. I like industrial landscape. I love it. I love to find beauty where people don't expect to see it. I think to elevate the commonplace is so much more challenging than to celebrate the obvious.
Yeah.
And obvious beauty is, no matter how well it's painted, there are times that all I can do is golf clap for it.
Okay,
I'm just
but not
you
subject
made it.
matter. I'm talking about the finished painting, right? I'm not suggesting we search for beauty to replicate. I'm saying is striving for beauty in the finished work
All right,
enough to
I'll
move
just say
people.
I'll just say one thing about that, and that's that. And I think I'd like to hear what my other artists here have to say about it. A lot of artists, after a certain point, if they paint, they wrap an idea of something or of themselves around nature. So the result, even though the subject matter may be different, the paintings all start to look the same in a way. And I think that's the challenge for any of us, is to have that fresh eye, and beauty. How if your idea of beauty, the penultimate of it, is 18th century Dutch or 19th century naturalism, I get it. I respect all of that. But at the same time, I think what Rose said earlier is that we all have biases, and those biases impede us all from fresh vision at times. And so that's, to me, what's interesting. And when I meant by earlier, who's still looking, I'm talking about having it was the Irish poet, John O'Donoghue. And I'll say it in my very bad Irish accent. He said, he talked about the graced eye, and he said, the graced eye would find beauty where the ungraced eye would never linger.
That's a great, Russian accent.
So good.
Yeah.
That's a Russian accent.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
But I think there's, so I think if you have an idea of beauty, you have to be very careful not to let that idea of beauty preclude you from seeing with a fresh eye as well.
I like that. That's interesting. What are your thoughts, Kwong?
No, I think that these guys are both saying such beautiful things. No, beauty is really the whole point to, even if I start a painting and I want to talk about how ugly society is and how bad the environment is, and we got to do something about this. In the end, when I put the first stroke on the canvas to the last stroke, it's about how beautifully all those elements fit together. Like, how does it sound? Like the music, how does it sound when it all comes together? The message is besides the point. It's there's an aesthetic beauty to to what we're doing, like seeing this is funny, but you're talking about that plaster being peeled off and it's beautiful to you. When I visited Vietnam, I was walking around photographing walls in around the old town. That became, because nobody stops to look at the walls, because the walls were painted with what do they call it? But it's layers of this paint that they put on, and then mud and the rain washes it off, and every few years they put a new coat on, and they keep building. And after like 100 years, this amazing patina, right, on this wall that comes through the layers. And I'm just mesmerized by this. And so I'm trying to incorporate that into my paintings. Like, how do I get that texture? You know what I mean? It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. And that's so in a sense, I could do still life, and I can do it 5 different ways, because I'm trying to articulate a different kind of beautiful aesthetic within each set of parameters. You see what I mean? So there's no question that beauty is the doorway. I just love that. Rose, Rose visited me in Pennsylvania, and we after the Portrait Society, and we spent late into the night talking like this, and I just love her. You got to come back. But but beauty is the doorway into everything that we do, no matter what we say or pretend to say, like trying to make a big statement. I think one of the best books that talked about this is The Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce. Have you ever read that?
Yes.
His little book. And he was, describing his growing up as a young man, being a strong Irish Catholic and all of that. But he had an aesthetic awakening right before he went to college. And that was what this whole book was leading to. And he described it as an aesthetic arrest, where time stops. And he was talking about this guy coming up with a jug on his shoulder or his bicycle or something. And all of a sudden he saw the beautiful aesthetic in that was so wonderful. And he talked about it being
And then time stops,
yes,
right?
that's right.
And
Yeah,
and the stillness, like the stillness that you were talking about, Joe, I think you mentioned earlier, the stillness is felt, right?
yeah,
I just see that beauty is that doorway to those. It's like one of them. I mean, I think we have others that we use as human beings, but beauty is, I see it more of as a service to a felt moment, right? Often
service
it's
to
like,
yourself or to others.
what?
Service to yourself or to others.
I think beauty is a service for all of us to a felt moment. Like I think that's what I mean by it's a doorway. I think that like beauty is like the doorway to awe, you know? And you know, like you something strikes, and then there's a possible moment to be really there, you know, a possible moment to be really present to it, a possible moment to be stillness. And I find beauty is a really good doorway to that.
Yeah.
And I think that painting beauty, painting the beautiful, I mean, I think you are actually, once again, an artifact of your experience. And so you have this thing, that this striving toward beauty. And I think that you're hoping or leaving sort of hoping for people to have an aesthetic arrest, and even for yourself to have that arrest, that moment of stillness, that moment of stop, that
Man.
moment of being there, the moment of like, you know, like, wow, you know, I'm no longer in my head. I really like that you defined that earlier form of art, Joe, about the intentionality. I really like that you went to head and body and stuff. I'm just very much there. I'm just very much there, very much witnessing, very much being, you know, and aware that I exist, you know. I think beauty is like a doorway to be your awareness that you even exist. You know, I think there's probably other ones. Right now, I'm just talking about beauty because I know that we run into that a lot in our field, you know?
Yeah.
So I've thought about that one more, but right now I'm not, other things that I think in the human experience that just, there are other ones that actually cause us to stillness, you know, cause us to,
Yeah.
you
That's
know,
the
does that make sense?
yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
I think that last 4 minutes was just gold. Fabulous. Very clear. And it was lovely.
This episode is brought to you in part by Rosemary Brushes. If you're one of my listeners who's a professional artist, you're already using Rosemary Brushes. But for the rest of you, come on. Take your work a little more seriously. Stop buying the other brands. It's just not worth it. Every now and then you may get lucky and buy a good brush from another brand, but use the brand that professionals like myself are using. Go to rosemaryandco.com, link in the description or the show notes, and get yourself some quality brushes before your next painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well said.
You guys ever heard, I want to hear what you got to say in a sec, Kwong, but have you ever heard a song with no words that brought tears to your eyes? There's no message. It's just music that somehow is so beautiful. It's like tickles your brain somehow. I don't know how it works. I was listening to, I'm like a total America's Got Talent junkie, the YouTube clips of America Got Talent. I love that stuff. And there was this girl who came up, and a woman, and she wanted to sing, what was it? The Shirley Temple song, Over a Rainbow.
Yeah.
And the judges were just rolling their eyes over it because it's such a cliche song, and, you know, in their opinion. And when she sang it, everyone was crying. The judges were crying. I was crying. Like, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I've heard that song 1,000 times. Like, no, the way she sung it was so beautiful. I don't know what neurons she's tickling in my brain to make me cry because of the way she's arranging the notes. And it, to me, that's beauty. It's like when you can surpass the message to where it almost doesn't even matter what the message is. And you said something like that, Kwang Ho. You said something like the message beside the point in your last comments. And that made me think of this. It's like, I didn't care what the words were to this song we've all heard 1,000 times, because the way she sung it just surpassed it. And that another point I wanted to make, that because the message sometimes does matter, and I feel like there's a balance. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. As obviously you guys all know, I paint, part of what I do is biblical paintings. And so I've noticed it's so interesting. People that love the subject matter will often be brought to tears. And then other people will resent my subject matter. And it doesn't matter what I do, it only irritates them. So there's this balance between beauty and subject that oftentimes can even be a conflict. But they can also help one another, right? Some people might say, like, if my mother bought one of your paintings, Joe, and said, what the crap? I don't want a painting of a big old truck in the middle of a field. I want a kitten and a butterfly and a rainbow.
I wouldn't blame her.
But I would want one of your paintings. So the point is, subject matter is one of those things that does sort of tickle the emotions of the viewer, but then so is the craft, which is what this woman tapped into. And what is it about that balance, or how can we strike that balance between those things?
I think the only way to transcend a cliche is through genuine connection.
That's it.
And that's what you witnessed with that girl.
Yeah.
Right. That's right. I think that's it, Joe. That's it. She was actually out of the way, right? The ego
Yeah, she was
thing,
dialed in. Yeah.
she was, it just allowed it to pass through her. Like,
Yeah.
it just was there. Just
Well,
so-
and also that goes to tell you, you should never apologize for what you love to paint. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you want to paint kittens and butterflies, do it, because that's where your heart is. But, eventually you're going to say, how do I do this really beautifully? Right. And when you do that well enough, you will convince me that butterfly and that kitten is what I need in my life. Right. And I think that's what great art does.
Yeah.
And I was gonna. This is similar to what you, the question that you just brought up. That I was gonna continue with the portrait of an artist, a young man. So James Joyce went on to describe it a little bit further. He said that the aesthetic arrest is not pornography nor didactic, and I didn't know what that meant. I was pretty young when I read this, and then Joseph Campbell came along.
Right.
He loves James Joyce, and he broke it down. He said, pornographic art is when you're trying to sell something. You're trying to sell
own it.
What's
Yeah.
that?
You want to own it.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're not referring to literal pornography as in sexual pornography. You're saying
No.
that
No.
just trying to sell something, you're sort of like, you're for lack of a better phrase you're slutting up the work in a way.
Exactly.
Right.
You're on it. You're on it. You're on it.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was also like to own it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was big Joseph Campbell. Joseph
Yeah.
Campbell's my life too. Pornographic is something about to have it, right?
To covet. Yeah.
Yeah,
Covet.
probably
I
to
think so.
covet is
I mean,
a
it's
good
a
word.
real interesting line, but that's one way. Like you're
Yep.
selling a product. You're selling
Right.
a product, and then on the other hand, the word didactic is you can do. And he said like 90% of literature that's been written in the last 100 years is didactic, which means they're writing against something. They're speaking up against something. They make, you know what I mean? They're trying to get you to believe into their way by putting
Right.
down some other idea. And I thought that's it. So a lot of this political art is didactic in the sense that they don't care about beauty, but they just want to shout at like how evil these people are, that kind of thing. And neither one of them is art in the sense of the highest art, where it's an aesthetic arrest. And all that implies to me is that the ego is out of the way. It is a direct response to beauty as much as, and you have to be careful because that word beauty, because Jeff, when you're talking about the person who loathes the idea of biblical art, lives in a world that is not good, right? Like that they hate everything about it, or a person who doesn't get trucks in the field. That's the first level that I was talking about, because
Right.
you live through a certain perspective, and you live through that assumption of what beauty is, what life is, what is important, what's not important, and then you live through that. But a person as an artist, for me, is being, I get it's like layers of onions, get the layers peel off one at a time, layers of untruth, in a sense, of habits, of assumptions, things that I thought was like this, and all of a sudden something comes along and knocks me upside the head, and I'm still, and all of a sudden I'm out. Another layer comes off, and I see the world a little bit differently, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And long-winded answer to that, but recently I read something that's really beautiful. I heard something that's really beautiful, and it was a channel thing on YouTube, and this person was saying that you think God is in the sky and in the butterflies and in the beautiful clouds, but you don't realize that God is in the dirt, in the mud, in the dung itself.
That's a good one.
And he said the only problem with humanity is that you don't see the divinity in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's good. That's
Isn't that
lovely.
good? Yeah, it really is beautiful.
Yeah.
So, you know, just hearing that makes me look at things completely differently for a little bit more.
Yeah.
Worth.
I
So-
do this series. Oh, no, go ahead. I mean,
I was just going to say, Joe, you have to go, don't you?
I've got a half hour.
Oh, you got a half hour. Oh,
already
good.
been-
I'm
it's
so
already been
glad.
an
I've
hour
been
and a
watching the
half.
clock. I've been watching the clock thinking we're done.
No, no.
But you know
I'm
what,
good.
guys? Oh, I want to say something before we start, but then I want you to get your comment. We're still on question number 1. I've still got a whole pad full of questions.
Oh, no.
Are you guys down for doing a part 2 and maybe 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 for this? Because there's a lot of questions.
I'd be happy to visit with these guys and you again, of course.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
we got to do a part 2. When
This is
you leave, we'll close.
delightful conversation.
Joe, when you
Yeah.
have to leave, we'll close and then we'll follow up as soon as you
Yeah.
guys can get together again. All right,
I'd love.
Rose, go
I mean,
ahead.
it-
Hey,
What were you gonna
Rose.
say?
Rose doesn't sound sick anymore.
We've
I
cured
know
her
you
with
woke
art
me
talk.
up a little.
Yeah, I love it.
You
That's
know,
awesome.
Every time I touch my head, though, it's because I'm running through some pain. So I'm
I
just
know.
trying.
I wondered
Oh.
that. I didn't want to
Sorry.
bring it up
Yeah,
because I thought,
that's right.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Sorry,
looking
leave
like.
it to me to bring it up then.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, oh,
That's okay.
sorry, Joe.
I'm glad you're saying it, though.
I didn't want to be a jerk like Joe and bring it up. You
Yeah.
know,
It's all right.
jeez.
But
Just
I
my
was gonna
nature.
say, I did this series. I did this series of paintings, which I think connects to what you were just saying, Kwang, where all summer long, this was the whole thread of this painting, of this whole series of paintings. And I don't know, I'm really interested in how you guys might interpret this. But all summer long, we had watched these cannas grow. Like it was that kind of a new plant in my garden, and I planted like 15 bulbs, and they grew. The first year only like 3 or 4 feet, and then the next year we put those same 15 bulbs back in, and they grew like to 10 feet tall, right? 8 feet tall. And all summer long, my dad and my mom and my husband and I were like, "Holy cow! Look at those cannas!" We're just like completely in awe of their growth and their beauty and their this, right?
Yeah.
And then in the fall, we live in Iowa, you have to dig up that plant, right? So in order to keep it from dying, right? Because it won't last in the soil. It needs to be pulled out of the soil. And so I went outside. My dad was in good shape back then. He used to do all that kind of gardening, and he's out there digging up the rhizomes or the roots or the plants that we had planted. And they had like quadrupled or maybe even 5 times as many as we had planted. And they were insanely beautiful, right? And I saw in that moment, I brought this big clump of roots up, this big giant this root system of these cannas up into my house. And I just put it in front of me. And the thing that struck me, and the whole essence of the entire series of painting became how all the time there was this underground world that I had never appreciated all summer long. Like I never thought that the world underneath that I wasn't seeing was as amazing and awe-striking and beautiful as the world that I was celebrating. And it struck me as the same problem. I felt that like I also had a feeling of connection to that, of just like even how I judge myself, right? I was being hard on myself in that moment about I'm a meditator, and I wasn't meditating like, "Oh, you're really bad at meditating." And in that moment, when I saw the root system that knew how to be and knew how to grow and supported this entire beauty that I was able to celebrate but was completely unaware of, I decided that there's something inside of me that I can actually trust, that's below the surface, that knows how to be and knows how to take care, even if it doesn't look on the outside world.
Oh my gosh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah. And that's like an entire series of paintings came from just trying to discover, like just trying to live in that moment, And I don't know if that sounds didactic or
Will you
pornographic.
stop killing me?
What'd you say?
I said, stop killing me. These are amazing. What you say?
Yeah, you got some great
Yeah,
one-liners.
yeah.
They're maybe not
Oh
a
my.
one-liner, but
Can you imagine what she'd be if she's not sick right now?
I know, seriously. Or maybe this is bringing out a different side of you.
Yeah.
Well, it's the
Maybe.
stuff underneath the healthy stuff that she doesn't normally get to access.
There you go.
No, that was
But-
Yeah, it's
brilliant.
like the root system.
That was
but,
too rich.
but
That's
Kwong,
so-
it speaks to your idea that, you know, you don't see the dirt. You don't see the divinity in the dirt and stuff like that. It was like really powerful.
It
Really
is.
powerful series of paintings. For me,
Terrific.
it was wonderful to live in that, you know. And I
Yeah.
like that as an example because I try to, when I teach, I try to say, now I don't know what you need as a student to find that door, right? What it is, the questions that you're seeking or the questions that you want to ask. But I really love when my questions are put on the easel. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I don't know how that fits because sometimes I think, Kwong, I don't always do the visual aesthetic, which I so much appreciate about your aims and stuff in the work. I do go to a narrative aesthetic, right?
Mhm.
And sometimes in conceptual kind of aesthetic that I'm searching because I'm really
Wait.
interested-
No, okay, you that's not true. You don't reject the visual aesthetic at all.
Well, I don't know. I think I will make choices for the narrative that might not serve the aesthetic always.
So it's just not your
I mean,
number
that's-
one priority, but you're not ignoring
right.
it.
No, I'm not ignoring it, but I only mention it because I really, you know, I don't know whether this is, but I know this. Let me say this. I don't know if that's a legitimate form of painting in a lot of people's eyes, but because maybe it's not painting in a way as much as it's a story or a narrative. But for me, when I'm painting something like that, I really feel like I'm painting what I'm supposed to be painting. Does that make sense? And
Yes.
I don't know how you guys, like how you see that
Yeah,
whole.
but as soon as you put paint on the canvas to paint what you've just been talking about, doesn't it become like, how do I make this really a good painting?
Yeah, it does. It
Yeah.
does. Right?
So-
it does.
But your
So in-
priorities, your beginning point might be different than the next artist. You know,
Yeah.
an artist that their beginning point might be, how do I describe this landscape and show how beautiful it is and put myself into it, where yours is, okay, I've got a narrative, I've got something I want to say with this narrative, and then the other things are sort of the icing that support the narrative.
Yeah.
That was a really bad mixed
anyway,
metaphor.
I don't mean
but
to get personal about a work since
No,
we're
you
talking
no,
about
get
that,
personal.
but I use it more like an illustration of what we're kind of, I think a way to kind of to make it an example of what we might be talking about a little bit too.
But that
Does that
goes
make
back
sense?
to that whole intention idea, because you might
Yeah.
have a different intention than another artist. One artist might have the intention of beautiful craftsmanship first, and then their concept and design are secondary. Where and yourself, you're saying that your narrative comes first, craftsmanship and design support the narrative.
And I think that connects. Yeah, I think that connects to what you were saying about your work, Joe. I mean, Jeff, your religious work. You see, so there's a
Well,
narrative
the narrative
that you
is
feel.
first, 100%.
Yeah, that creates a doorway for you, you know, and then you find ways to say it. And the way for you to say it in this time period, you know?
But like the woman who
It's
sang that
interesting.
song, if the
Yeah.
craftsmanship isn't good enough, then no one takes the narrative seriously,
That's right.
right? Like the narrative is number one, but most of my energy ends up going to the craft, because I have to learn to sing as beautifully as that woman with my brush, or no one will listen to the words. If the song
Yeah.
sounds terrible, people leave the room and they won't listen to
Yeah,
the words.
Mozart
right?
said that in Delacroix's letters. He quoted Mozart in 1837. He said, "Music should contain all manner of emotion, but never be hard on the ear."
Yeah.
That's so
How
good.
do you have such retention of all these great
I
quotes?
know, he's
know,
like a
it's really good.
library.
That is
I
like
can't look. Don't say that in front of my wife. She's like, "You can't remember the kids' birthdays, for God's sake."
Well, you filled all
It's
your
just-
mind with quotes.
Yeah, I'm stuck
Love it.
with all this other stuff.
It's
That's
what
funny.
I love about the way I love that about your podcast with Jeff. I mean, I just love these references that you tap into. I wish I had it. I wish I was like, maybe when I grow up, I'll be like you, Joe. Be really happy.
It's funny. It's like what Kwong was saying. That I'm always fascinated by like, I don't know, I mean, when you read a lot and and I love art history, so that all of a sudden you find these connections between things that you've never necessarily heard anybody talk about. But it's because everybody, whether you're writing or you're making music or whatever, hopefully you're making something artful, but there's so much great thought that's come before us. I'm always amazed. There's a book that I had in college, and I'm rereading, Artists on Art. It's just little snippets, but you read something somebody wrote, Gainsborough wrote, 300 years ago, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Now, I think the main thing, and I really feel like you guys seem this way to me. I'm not certain about anything at this point in my life, but I'm clear about certain things in this moment. But I'm willing to adjust that, And the lovely thing about these kind of conversations with people that are as bright as all of you is that it's just it's elevating, and it's lovely to hear what you have to say. Because we're talking about the same thing, but I think metaphor, your use, Rose, of metaphor is terrific, and it really helps illustrate these things, because you can quote other people all you want, but ultimately, when I look at somebody's painting, I really want to know what they think and what they feel. And that's what I meant by kind of aping things that have been done before too strongly. Because I really want to know what you think. And to speak to something Kwong was saying earlier, like I painted along the railroad here, and there are these old walls that were built 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and they're all different. And there's this patina on each wall that, like, to me, when I paint that wall, it's a portrait. I don't paint a generic wall. I'm honoring the life that thing had when I paint it. So I never think about texture as a separate form. To me, it's only in service of saying or getting to the essence of saying that particular thing. And then all of a sudden, the painting is filled with different surfaces: transparency, semi-transparency, opacity, semi-opacity. But for me, never for its own sake. Like, what interests me is telling the story of that place and that thing. It's just like painting a face, hey, sorry to drop another quote on you, but Robert Henry from The Art Spirit, he said, paint every stave of a picket fence with wit and energy. It has a life that has run through it. That's right. And to me, that's really well, there's an example, of a painting where, I mean, there's just all these different layers. There's limestone, limestone cave, and then there's these old huge blocks that were placed in the 1880s, and they're chipped, and it's again, I'm never trying to be just illustrative. There's a vibe that every place has, just the way every human being has. Because life has moved through that place and left its mark on that place. To me, that's what's so exciting, right? So everywhere you go, if I stand on the banks of the Hudson River, it feels completely different than when I stand on the banks of the Mississippi. When I drive through the cornfields, I painted in Iowa, totally different vibe than Minnesota, than the East Coast where I'm from, or New England. That, like, there is something, you guys, it's just so exciting. I mean, like I said, I know all of your work because I've looked at it for a long time, but there's that you guys are all digging in your own way. You're all doing your due diligence, if as it were, to it's almost like forensics in a way. It's emotional forensics. You're digging into the layers of that thing that's in front of you, and hopefully having that come back through your hand in a
Yeah.
way.
That's a wonderful way to put it. I love that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Some great stuff being said today. You know, Rose, I was just thinking about the artwork that has affected me. There's one in particular whose work gets me directly to the experience, and then I think about how well it's done, and that's Andrew Wyeth.
Oh yeah.
Wyeth is able to make me stand there and just tear come down my eye. I feel what he feels, and he
Yeah.
paints these his experience around him. You know, he doesn't go out to look for say it's just there, and you feel what he feels about that
Yeah.
wall. It's like, you know, and no one, not even Rembrandt can do that for me. Not even Sargent can do that. Sargent, I see the painting, I marvel at how it's done.
Right.
But with Wyeth,
The facility, yeah.
yeah,
Right.
but Wyeth takes me directly to the experience, and I wouldn't feel that if he wasn't the highest
Yeah.
skilled draftsman. That I some of his painting, I'm thinking, there's no way I could do that. I could replicate anybody's paintings. I can't do what Wyeth did with his painting.
Bong, I just saw a painting of his in the museum in Asheville, and it was the only painting that riveted me. And it was a block of ice that was sitting right in the front of the picture, that with the layers where it's frozen. You know, when you see a piece of ice that's out of a lake, or where it's warmed up and there's leaves stuck in it,
Yes.
and the brandy wine is in the back. Oh
Yeah.
my God, the hair was standing up on my neck. I'm like, nobody was like, he took something that nobody cares about, and he honored that thing in the most powerful way. I just was completely taken. But he said,
about Wyeth.
yeah, he said he couldn't get to that though without going through the surface of the thing. You know, and
I mean, that's a whole that everything I think we could talk about is trying to get to it through the surface of the thing.
yeah.
Yes,
The whole
that's the mystery.
You guys, this is such a delight to be here with you. I have to say that.
It's fun.
That's all.
Man, I totally feel it. I'm feeling it.
yeah.
Rose, so
imagine why I had to do it even though I have COVID, right?
I
was like,
know, seriously, you're
like,
such
I
a
gotta be up
champ.
with these guys.
Hey,
Yeah,
Rose, what
anyway.
are you? These guys have both mentioned artists. I'm curious. I never asked you during years. It's not a question I generally ask, but are there artists that you really look at for inspiration?
I've been looking at people my whole life from at different points. You know, when I was in believe it or not, when I was in Scotland, I had told my students about how I had a passion about Toulouse-Lautrec for a long
Really?
period, you know, which is crazy, you know, like Toulouse-Lautrec. But it seems like for me, I think the questions that facilitate or push my work, push me to look at different people at different times. So I'm looking for people who've I feel like have tried to see something that I'm seeing. And so right now I'm kind of daft. I don't know who I'm thinking of at this point, but I kind of look at everybody, you know. I look at everything too. Like I don't mind the style. Like when you're talking, Kwong, about the layers of the walls in Vietnam, right? That makes me have to look. I definitely have to look at how people are thinking about layers, like how people are representing layers, you know. And that's like a thing I've been really interested in. I don't even do it, but I don't do it enough, but I always want to do layers, you know? And I mean, so I guess it's usually a question that I'm in the middle of with my work that kind of inspires me to study whomever I can find. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
yeah. So like when you guys talk about Andrew Wyeth, go in and see in the Andrew Wyeth, I had exactly like I mean, not exactly the same because it's a personal thing, but I remember just being like in tears and moved by Andrew Wyeth as well. And then another time I go back and I'm just studying him. Does that make sense?
Right.
Studying his composition and studying this, like breaking him down into pieces. But I love when I can go in and really experience a painter's work as a viewer that's allowed to be touched, you know. I was at a museum and I think it was in New York and stuff, and Chuck and I like those old religious pieces where they do like Memling and stuff, Hans Memling and all those guys as well. And I don't know if it was Memling or do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't.
You guys know, right? but I'm thinking of the other ones like Gerard David, not the not the one that's the 19th, the later century, but the older one, right? So anyway, I was looking at some, maybe Robert Campin or Campin, I don't know what it was. I was looking at this piece at the museum, and I was of course studying it and just like, wow, you know, being mesmerized by the way he built, the way this painter had built the stuff. And two other museum people came, and they saw the narrative. Like, they're like, wow, look at that. That's like, that guy's got his head cut off and this person's doing that. And I hadn't even seen it, right?
Oh, I'm so guilty of that so many times.
You know, and that's what I mean. It's like, you go, like, it's really, it almost seems, this is where I think intention has to come in as a viewer. I almost have to go in and be intentional to allow myself to feel. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Other times I go intentional to allow myself to understand what they're doing, you know, what they're discovering. But I really love when I feel first, you know, go in and just be like those people standing right next to me, innocent viewers seeing that story and having an emotional reaction to it. And me, I'm like looking at these things and didn't even notice the thing was coming out and the guy was being flayed and such like that. You know,
I can't even count
wow.
how many times I've done that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in there, that's where everything is, isn't it? Live in that. What do I bring? What do I bring to the moment? What do I bring to the moment as a painter? What do I bring to the moment as a viewer? What allows me to step back as a painter, not be me in the painting, but to be experiencing painting through me, you know, like what gets in the way from that? You know, those are all, like, I think this is where we live. I mean, I think maybe where art lives, in that quest or that discovery or that adventure that you're willing to engage in, you know, and that we can see when people leave traces of that in their work. We can experience it. We can feel it, you know. Anyway, I'm going on. I'm sorry.
We are getting close to finish. So I'm going to present a question to think about because you guys have committed. We're doing this again. So I'm holding you to it. So, but we're not going to have time. This is way too much of a question.
Yeah, I got to leave in 5. So.
I know,
Yeah,
right?
sorry.
So this is a good
So I
time to ask the
apologize, but
question.
I
I
have
want
no
you guys to
choice.
think about it for when we come back. But we've talked about so many things, and it makes art seem important, right? This conversation to me makes me feel like, oh man, I'm doing something that matters. But that's actually the question. Does it matter? And really, you might argue that all we're doing is smearing particles of mud and dirt around an oil on a canvas. And what is it in the end anyway, when there are so much other arguably more relevant, important endeavors in the world that we could spend our time doing, right? And particularly in this day and age when image making and image access to images is so vast and simple. And that's the question I want to talk about next time is it still relevant? You know, we're image makers in a world where our iPhones can make any image we want in any moment. And so what's the relevance of it?
Yeah.
Something to think about. Let's not even get started because we've only got 2 minutes, but like, I'll just close up by just thanking you guys. This was seriously the coolest podcast. Home run for my 100th episode. And thanks for coming the first time, because I seriously, literally idolize all 3 of you guys. You're the best of the best. And I'm so honored that you came on today, and I hope we can do it again really, really soon.
Been a delight. Great to visit with all of you.
Such a delight.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
And Rose, way to step up and just, you know, you look more alive than both of us boys.
Yeah,
Well,
she's
on
COVID.
fire. She got the fire. That's what happened. That's
We
good.
need to. I'm going to keep the camera on for when we close up, Rose, because I just want to see if you pass out after everyone leaves.
I am definitely passing out.
All right, so we'll see you guys soon. Thanks again.
Until next time. Take care.
Next time. Take care.
Cheers. Enjoy your evening.
You guys.
Thanks for tuning in to the Undraped Artist Podcast. If you enjoyed it, subscribe. And if you could, leave a comment or review. That really helps the channel. Please share the show with your friends, and if you're feeling generous, consider a monthly donation at theundrapedartist.com. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next week.